Good afternoon. You remember that last week I spoke to you about that great European, Stefan Zweig. It was with Stefan Zweig that I went to the funeral of one of the greatest men that the world has ever known, the funeral of Sigmund Freud. And it was through Stefan Zweig and a few friends, in which I had a very minute share, that we were able to rescue Sigmund Freud from Vienna. And he came to London. You should have known London at that time, in 1938. It was the time of the Munich crisis, when we expected war any minute. And here, a few of the great intellects of Europe were gathered together: Freud, Stefan Zweig, a few other men who have worked always to redeem and to free the human spirit, to make them healthy, to make them better, to make them be able to endure the world. This group of people looked almost as not only just refugees, but from wreckage from a vessel that is going down the deep sea. But Sigmund Freud, though he was never accused of being too much of an optimist, Sigmund Freud was rather cheerful. And I remember when Stefan Zweig rang me up and he said that he has just knowledge that Sigmund Freud arrived in Paris and he will be coming over now within the next day or two to London. The friendship between these two people, between Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, the greatest psychologist of this age, and probably one of the very greatest that has ever lived, the friendship between these two people, I say, was rather unique in the world. Because Stefan Zweig, though he was not a scientist, was nevertheless a man of the finest psychological insight into the soul of man. And of course, Sigmund Freud was the man who knew greater secrets of men's heart than any other man in the world of the 19th or 20th century. I think that in the study of Sigmund Freud in Vienna, more secrets were told about human emotions, about human feelings, and about the sickness and the depravity of the human mind than anywhere else in any other study in the world. Stefan Zweig had a very great admiration and true love for Sigmund Freud. And the men who came in contact with Freud could not forget his face, his manner of talking, and the sincerity and the wholeness of his character. He was rather a severe man. Some people used to imagine him too severe. But then, you see, the man, Sigmund Freud, did not have any illusions about the world or about man. And nobody, I think, nobody knew more the secret motives of men's desires than Sigmund Freud. In his magnificent autobiography, Zweig tells us about his friendship with Freud. And there is, if you are a real student of Freud, you will find a study of Stefan Zweig written by Freud in 1920 or 21, I believe, I forget now the date. But this is a study of his famous short story, Amok, that Stefan Zweig wrote in those days. And Freud was a great admirer of the literary talent of the genius of Zweig, and he loved him not only as a pupil, but dearly as a friend and as a great writer. And so the great friendship between Zweig and Freud was rather unique between a poet and such a great scientist. And Stefan Zweig writes, I had known Sigmund Freud, that great and austere spirit, who more than any other in our time deepened and broadened our knowledge of the soul of man. When in Vienna he was still appraised and opposed as an obstinate and difficult intellectual hermit, a fanatic for truth, while yet fully cognizant of the limits of all truths. And once he said to Zweig, absolute truth is as impossible as to obtain an absolute zero temperature. That's rather interesting, isn't it? He had estranged himself from the university and its academic scruples by his imperturbable venturing into heretofore unexplored and timidly avoided zones of the upper nether realm of instinct, the very sphere on which the epoch had set a solemn taboo. Unconsciously, the optimistic liberal world sensed that the wellspring psychology of this uncompromising mind utterly undermined its thesis of gradual suppression of the instinct by reason and progress. However, it was not merely the university, nor the clique of old school neurologists who resisted the inconvenient outsider, and Freud was an outsider to them. It was the whole old world, the mind of another day, the proprieties. It was the entire epoch that feared the unveiler in him. A medical boycott against him slowly took form, and his practice dwindled. But as his thesis, and even the boldest of his theories, were scientifically irrefutable, they tried, Viennese fashion of course, to dispose of his theory of dreams by means of irony, or by delightfully distorting it to the humorous parlor game. Once a week, a faithful group visited the solitary man, and at those evening discussions, the new science of psychoanalysis was molded into form. Long before I grasped the implications of the intellectual revolution which slowly shaped itself from Freud's first fundamental labors, I had yielded to him the moral strength and the steadfastness of this extraordinary man. Here at last was a man of science, the exemplar of a young man's dreams, prudent of statement until he had positive proof, but unshakable against the opposition of the world once he was satisfied that his hypothesis had become a valid set. Here was a man of the most modest personal demands, but ready to battle for every tenet of his teaching, and faithful unto death to the immanent truth of the theories which he vindicated. A more intellectually interpreted person could not be imagined. Freud always dared to express what he thought, even if he knew that his straight, positive declaration might disturb and distress. He never sought an easy way out by making even perfunctory concessions. And it is to be confident that if Freud had only been willing to drape his ideas carefully, to say, for instance, eroticism instead of sexuality, eros instead of libido, and not always rigidly to insist on his final deductions instead of just indicating them, it would have been possible for him to give unhindered utterance to 4/5 of his theories before any academic body. But when the doctrine and the truth were concerned, he remained intransigent. The tougher the resistance, the tougher he became his determination. When I search for a symbol of moral courage, the only earthly heroism that can be performed solo, I always see before me the handsome, masculine, candid face of Freud with his dark eyes and direct and quiet gaze. And I remember when Freud came to London, and Stefan Zweig was the happiest man that he was rescued from the nails of Hitler's satellites in Vienna. He left everything there, and he came over with the help of that magnificent woman, Princess Marie Bonaparte. He took a house in London, the outskirts of London, Hampstead. men who had fled to London from his native land, to which he had given worldwide and eternal fame, was old in years, besides being very ill. But he was neither weary nor bent. The secret that we harbored, the fear of finding him embittered and distressed after all the hours of torture which he must have endured in Vienna. But Stefan Zweig told me that he found him more restrained and even happier than ever. Freud was calm in London, with the great calmness of a giant. He led me out into his garden, Stefan Zweig tells him, in the outskirts of London, and he said, "Did I ever have a nicer home?" he said, and a bright smile about the once too stern mouth. He showed me his beloved Egyptian statuette, which Maria Bonaparte had rescued for him. "Isn't this home again?" he said. And on his desk laid the large folio pages of his manuscript, which at 83 he wrote with the old, legible, rounded script, every day, as clear in his mind as in his best period, and equally fast. His strong will had risen superior to everything, illness, age, exile, and for the first time, the kindness of his being, which had been damned during long years of struggle, flowed freely from him. Age had only made him mellower. The trials he endured more forbearing. Once he reserved, he would not proffer the familiar gesture. He would lay his arm on my shoulder, and his eyes would glow more warmly through his shining glasses. Over the years, a conversation with Freud had always constituted one of my greatest intellectual satisfactions, writes Stefan Zweig. While one learned, one marveled, it was plain that one's every word was fully comprehended by this magnificent, unprejudiced person whom no admission startled, no statement excited, and whose impulse was one of the quickest in the whole world. To make others see and feel clearly had long since become an instinctive life impulse. Never, however, was I more gratefully sensible of the irreplaceable quality of those long conversations than during the dark year which was to be his last. At the moment of the entering his room, it was as if the madness of the world outside had been shut off. Whatever was terrible reverted to the abstract. Confusion resolved itself. That which was concerned with our moment of time clicked in its humble place in the great cyclic faces. It was my first experience of a true sage, exalted beyond himself, to whom neither pain nor death longer counted as a personal experience, but as a super-personal matter of observation and contemplation. His dying was no less a moral feat than his life. Freud already then suffered greatly from the illness that was soon to take him from us. One could see that it was a strain for him to speak with his artificial palate, and one was almost apologetic for every word that he granted, because articulation cost him exertion. But he would not let one go. It was the pride of his spirit of steel to manifest to his friends that his will remained more potent than vulgar bodily torments. His mouth distorted by pain, he wrote at his desk until the last days, and even when pain tortured his sleep at night, that wonderfully sound, healthy sleep which had been the prime source of his strength for 80 years, he denied himself sleeping portions and any narcotic. He did not wish the lucidity of his mind to be dulled. Now that's very interesting. To be dulled by a single hour of such elevation. Rather suffer and remain alert. Rather think under torture than not think at all. Hero of the spirit to the very end. It was a terrible struggle, and it became more magnificent the longer it lasted. From one day to the next, the shadow of death showed more plainly on his face. It hollowed his cheeks. It chiseled the temples out of his brow. He twisted his mouth. He checked the words on his lips. Against the eyes alone, the dark reaper was impotent. Against its unconquerable watchtower from which the heroic mind gazed into the world, eye and mind remained clear to the last moment. And Stefan Zweig tells us how he took the world-famous painter Salvador Dali with him to visit Freud and at the same time make a drawing. In my opinion, Stefan Zweig writes, the most gifted painter of the younger generation, Salvador Dali, who revered Freud and immensely loved him, while I talked with Freud, he worked at a sketch. I dare not show it to Freud because clairvoyantly Dali had already incorporated death in the picture. And I remember when that fatal day came, when Stefan Zweig rang me up and told me that Sigmund Freud has passed away. And I went to the funeral. It was Stefan Zweig and the great psychoanalyst of the English school, Ernest Jones, were the only two men that made the funeral orations there. Stefan Zweig was rather short. He spoke for about 5 minutes, and I saw literally tears flowing from his eyes. Later, when he spoke about Freud, he spoke with great love. With a love about him that it was not only the men who gave the world something to cure the diseases of the mind, not only the men who understood probably literature more than any other critic of literary works, but Zweig saw in Freud the great friend, the friend of the tormented soul, and no writer knew more what a torment is than Sigmund Freud. The struggle of the strongest will at this most penetrating mind of our time against destruction became increasingly cruel. Only when he himself realized clearly, he to whom clarity always had been the highest quality of thinking, that he would not be able to continue to write, to function. Like a Roman hero, he permitted the doctor to end his pen. It was the noble end of a noble life, a death memorable even among the hecatombs of that murderous time. And when we friends lowered his coffin into English soil, we knew that we had given it the best of our homeland. It was in those days, it was just a month or two since Hitler has let the rages of war loose over Europe. It was then when we all thought that the world is really coming to an end. It was the very few that had the faith to remain and to struggle on and to fight and to win. And now, 11 years after Sigmund Freud's death, in every country, where there is civilization struggling and humanity conscious of the great crisis in history, everywhere Sigmund Freud's name is not only revered by the few, but his name has become now a household word, and every psychiatrist, even those who did not agree with Freud, and although there are many now who would improve, so to speak, on his theory, and enlarge upon it, or deepen it, or use such materials which was impossible for Freud to know, even those who are not so to speak, the orthodox Freudians, even they find themselves that Freud, as the pioneer in modern psychiatry, as the pioneer in healing, as the pioneer in delving deep into the human spirit, this Freud is unique in the history of psychology. And, my dear friend, I want to add something which has very rarely been said about Freud, and that is Freud's attitude to his own people, to the Jewish people. You see, Freud was not what you might call a religious man. On the contrary, Freud sometimes finds that the institutionalized religion did not help greatly. But Freud was, in a higher sense, a man with a great faith. He had faith in the spiritual values. And because of his great faith in spiritual values, he remained a proud Jew. And he realized that maybe that his genius was typically Jewish. And you know that the anti-Semites did, when they hated his theory, they hated it first and foremost because they looked upon it as a Jewish theory. And you know, and psychoanalysis was known as the Jewish science, in contradistinction to the Christian science. Freud himself tells us in a famous letter that he wrote to the president of the B'nai Brit. I remember seeing that letter in which Freud says that I have always been a proud Jew, because to belong to a minority and to remain steadfast within that minority is a sign of moral vigor. And we need such moral vigor in the world, because the non-conformity to the hypocrisy of the world is the very thing that makes progress possible. Now, that's why he and his children, and I know, for instance, his son, one of the finest architects in England, is a proud Jew, and so is his daughter, herself a great scientist, Anna Freud, one of the most wonderful psychoanalysts now living. And so Freud, he died, he was cremated, buried in London, and though he had some controversial things to say in a book which I myself regard as rather not his best, and even as in a certain sense a failure, that is the book on Moses and monotheism. Nevertheless, Freud, the great Jew, the great Jewish genius, was and still is with us as one who dared to say something about men which nobody else dared to say before. In this respect, Freud will remain immortal. Good afternoon.